Hi, I'm Steve Stone, and I'm here today to talk to you about digital technologies, but specifically about the fundamental investments organizations need to make in order to establish a foundation for success. So let's begin with a quick introduction. I have about 37 years in technology experience, and I won't bore you with all the details. Just needless to say, I started as a COBOL programmer and progressed my way to become a CIO for a number of years before I retired in 2017. I formed my current company, NSU Technologies, as an advisory firm to technology and retailers. And that led me to write a book in 2018 on digital transformation. With that kind of as a backdrop, let's begin our discussion today. We're recording this live, and COVID's changed many things, but the one thing it really hasn't changed is the focus on digital technologies. In fact, most of the executives I've spoken to over the last few weeks have talked about the intense focus now on using digital technologies to improve their businesses. And these technologies have been dominating our landscape for years. Think about new business models and radical increases in efficiency, the ability to really conduct better experiences with our customers, our associates, and our partners. And you think about some of the technologies you see on the screen here, many of these are very well established, like cloud and mobile. They've launched countless new businesses over the years. We see AI and machine learning becoming very popular with lower cost technology for computing and storage. IoT, I mean, how many of us don't have a smart speaker at home of some sort? And AR, or I should say augmented reality and virtual reality. Gaming systems a few years ago and now suddenly being used to make surgeons better, to allow retailers to build new retail experiences and design new stores, to 3D printing, which is expected to be a $26 billion industry by 2022. And finally, blockchain, which is our basis for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, but now also finding its way into supply chain, authenticity verification, smart contracts, and is the core technology in electronic voting. So these technologies have fueled a number of success stories. And these are a few examples. I've chose 5 of companies that have grew up in the digital age, and I won't cover all of them, but many of these should be very familiar to you. Airbnb started as a marketplace for lodging about 12 years ago, and now is a $2.6 billion entity. HelloFresh out of Berlin, Germany, is the largest meal kit provider in the United States. Startup in 2011, now a $1.4 billion company. And all of these companies were born in the digital age. They have very flexible business models that use cloud, mobile, and social. But as I think we'll see, digital is not just for the natives. These are some examples of larger companies. These are logos that should be familiar to everyone. Anheuser-Busch InBev is the world's largest producer of beverages. Disney is a media giant. Walmart is the largest retailer in the world. And yet these big companies are also investing in digital technologies. For example, Anheuser-Busch has invested heavily in a B2B mobile app that leverages artificial intelligence to help liquor stores, retailers, and others make better inventory decisions and have the right products in stock to optimize sales. Disney made a $1.5 billion investment in Internet of Things, or IoT. All of that was really around the Magic wristband, which allows people in the parks now to use it as their hotel key to pay for various things inside the park, or even be as their ride ticket. And using that, Disney was able to leverage big data analytics to understand how people were navigating their parks to make for a better experience for their customers. Then finally, Walmart has invested extremely heavily in e-commerce to combat Amazon. And you see now with their acquisition of companies like Jet and ModCloth, they're offering everything from low-end merchandise to very top-end with things like Lord & Taylor. And Wall Street's rewarded Walmart with these changes they've made in their business model, as they're now doubling their stock price in 2020 from just 2016. So in 4 years, they've doubled their stock price. But this is only part of the story for digital transformation. Despite these notable successes, we see a very high failure rate in digital technologies, and specifically in digital transformations. And during my time at L Brands, we looked at a lot of those challenges. Was the culture ready? Was our board engaged? Was there truly a digital strategy? Was our messaging right? And a lot of these things inspire me to write my book, which is entitled Digitally Deaf: Why Organizations Struggle with Digital Transformation. But the buck for digital transformation isn't left with the business. IT has to find ways to really partner with the business, to really set the table for success, to inspire the art of the possible, to educate the board or the leadership, and help drive unified messaging. But even aligning the business with IT doesn't guarantee success. IT has to establish a technology foundation as well. And I guess, what do I mean by that? Well, digital technologies, I think, is similar to a house. If the foundation's not right, the rest of the house suffers. And when you talk about the business foundation that we mentioned earlier, things like culture, vision, strategy, unified messaging, you can't overstress that enough. But many digital efforts struggle because IT failed to establish the right technology foundation to support digital transformation. So what is this foundation? Well, the answer lies somewhat in the definition that I gave to digital transformation in my book. Digital transformation is the development of a unified platform consisting of systems and processes exploiting digital technologies in a manner that fundamentally changes how an organization collects and uses data to positively influence customer interactions. It's a mouthful, it's a long definition. Let's break it down a little bit. We're building a platform when we digitally transform. We're not building a system or a solution. So the outcome is to enable change. So we can't transform our business if we can't transform ourselves. So the first part of this may come as a surprise to people, but it's governance and operating model. We in IT have to change. The days of 3, 4, 5-year projects are over. We have to find ways to deliver quicker and get value to the business quicker. Then let's go back and reflect on that definition again. We talk about how we fundamentally change how we collect and use data. So the next major part of the foundation is it's data. While data has always been important, look at the technologies on the screen. None of those can work without timely and accurate data. So while data has always been important, it's never been more important than now. In fact, a catchphrase that I find myself using a lot now is, data is the new currency. So the final piece, we'll go back to the definition one more time, is we're building a platform for agility. But everything has to work together. Again, those 3, 4-year projects can't exist. And speed and agility in everything that we do is important. So the final piece of this is something we call interoperability. And interoperability is how the systems and devices talk to one another, how we assemble or build applications and then deploy them. So those are the 3 foundational elements that I want to talk about today. And we're going to cover these in a little bit more definition and talk about some of the investments needed to ensure success. So let's begin with governance and operating model. Governance, I like to call, is a framework that ensures IT enables business plans and objectives. It's how the business requests services from IT, how requests are prioritized, how IT delivers value. It also gets into risk management and IT performance as well. The IT operating model are more those specific processes and procedures that really guide the work in IT. And so I guess the first question is, why is it critical, and why is it critical now? I think to understand that, you have to look at the current state of IT organizations. A delivery gap exists. And I think most of us would say we rarely would have enough IT capacity to handle everything that the business is requesting. And it's an age-old problem, but think about what we're seeing now with the influx of more and more digital technologies, the need to deliver more and faster because technology is changing so rapidly. And while IT has added capacity through staffing and getting more efficient and using new tools, it isn't enough to really bridge that gap. So to address that, try to address that with traditional methods and traditional processes is really an exercise in futility. So let me illustrate. This is a model that may look familiar to some of you. It's a simplified version of what we used at Lowe's in 2009. And we ran very, very large, complex projects through this type of funding model. By very large, I mean some in excess of $50 million and some actually in excess of $100 million. It's a very rigorous model, and it's aligned to strategy, and we measured results religiously. In fact, we could tell you, using this model, our blended return on our IT investment over X number of periods. We could talk about what resources were needed now and in the future. All that's great, but it was very slow. Controls throughout this process required a myriad of sign-offs, and that just to get started. In fact, there was a similar model in place when I joined L Brands, and I started looking at the amount of time between an idea being generated from the business or request until the point in time we could start. It was over 3 months at our fastest, and over 80% of the time someone was waiting on something. So this is a very, I guess, a good process for long 4 or 5 year projects, but in 2020, that's not what we're doing anymore. So this is not really how we want to operate in a digital age. So what we have to do is we have to shatter this model. We have to create a new type of model to run IT. And what we would propose is a product-based model. And so why product versus project? Think about your total cost of ownership. Have you ever witnessed a product or a project complete and go into production and everyone's very happy? They use it for a few years and then suddenly you notice that people aren't using the system as much and they're going around the system. And what happens is, after I've spent a lot of money to implement a project, after a period of time, I don't want to spend that money anymore. I want to kick the can down the road because I just spent $10 million or something. Next year, I may not want to invest in an upgrade, or maybe I'll kick that can down the road 2 more years, and suddenly I have an application that hasn't been updated in a period of time. That leads to backlogs. It leads to people working around the system. Technology has to be treated like an asset. Think about owning a car. You take care of it, you maintain it, you change the oil, you have the brakes aligned and so forth. So now we're getting to thinking about technology in the same way, and that's what this model really gets to. It's a product ownership model where a product owner has distinct responsibilities to define product needs over a period of time, present those for approval, and once approved, we move them into an execution cycle that hopefully we're working in very quick sprints. We'll use the word user stories and sprints, which could be 2-week efforts. In the case of packaged software, it could be longer. But at the end, we move the release into production. We get value quickly, and we iterate to success. The idea is to break work down into smaller controllable elements to stay on track and make sure that funding is flowing continuously. And this is a tremendous step forward if we can achieve this, but it still doesn't address all the issues in the delivery gap. We need additional help. And that help's going to come in an unlikely form, the business itself. When I joined L Brands, one of the first things I did was look at all the backlogs for the various applications. And one that really came to mind was our business intelligence backlog. As I looked through it, and it was probably 2.5 years long, 80+% of the efforts could have been done by the business themselves if we had just simply provided the right tools and the right training to them. Instead, the business was left to fend for themselves using Excel and Access. So I'm a big proponent of this whole idea of self-service. I think it represents the future for a lot of IT services going forward, such as business intelligence, forecasting, business process management are just a few that come to mind. And we have to architect smartly in order to be able to enable this. Done correctly, though, this, with the new type of processes that I spoke of earlier, we can close the delivery gap. So what does this investment portfolio for the governance and operating model look like? Well, the first piece of this is really about training. It's about coaching and building awareness, making people understand, Agile as a methodology requires input from, or requires effort from both the business and from IT. Once you have the training and the baseline in place, you now need to look at project management and issue tracking. Essentially what we want to do is provide great transparency so we're all on the same page. And there's a lot of great tools out there to do this. For example, Jira or Azure DevOps, Asana. These are all products that people use for agile project management and issue tracking. And then after we have that, we need to be able to collaborate. And I think we've all seen that in COVID, that we have people working remotely in all sorts of different places. And we're getting very accustomed to using Slack and Microsoft Teams and Google Hangouts. But it's going to be very important go forward that our teams stay aligned, and collaboration is a key part of that. Source and version control is especially important if companies are building a lot of software themselves and not really using packaged software. I mean, GitHub is probably the most well-known of the source and version control systems, but you also have Microsoft Team Foundation Server and things like that. And finally, we have to be able to automate how we deploy code to production. And automation tools really take a lot of the steps that were manual in the past, very error-prone, and build those into a very high-quality, secure deployment. And Jenkins is a product that comes to mind right off the bat. So you could start out in all of these with very basic tools, but ultimately you'll come down to the point of choosing between a series of best-of-breed tools or open source, or maybe even an integrated environment like Microsoft Teams or Altasian. So let's look next at data management. And after governance, the next major component that we need to ensure digital projects succeed is data. I mean, and I'm using a term here, data management, that's fairly broad. It covers all aspects of data, including master data management, data quality, data catalogs, database management systems. And as I said before, data is very important, but with digital technologies, it's more important than ever. Let's look at that. This chart represents the total data created annually going all the way through 2025. And needless to say, this is unprecedented growth. But let's just look at one sliver of this. This is 2019 to 2020. In that 1 year, this past year, we created more data in this 1 year than existed in the entire world through 2014. So we're creating more and more data. And I guess that begs the question, what is all this data? And what we're finding is a lot of it is new. It's unstructured types of data, like images, video, and entertainment. We also see growth in our transactional data that we're kind of accustomed to, but we also see a lot of data coming in, geospatial data for mobile devices and smart devices. What this chart doesn't show is a massive growth in public cloud. It's grown from 5% in 2010 of all storage to now over 30% last year. And also data shifting more and more from bulk batch data to real-time streaming data, where that was only 10% of total data in 2010. It's now 20% in 2020. And finally, how we're using data is changing as well. In 2010, the average person would interact with data about 85 times a day. In 2019, that number had risen to 600, and the number is forecasted to be nearly 2,000 by 2025. Data is really at the core of all digital technologies and is becoming more central to everyone's daily life. So let's look at it in a little bit different light. This is a bit more technical look at data, and this is how data is stored. And you'll see that relational databases, which we've been using for years, are still the king. About 75% of data is stored in a relational database. In fact, the next closest is something called a document store, which is at 9%. But look how it's changed over the last 2 years. If you look at the very bottom of this chart, you'll see a red line. That's relational databases. It's grown relatively flat. All the other types of models are growing rapidly. For example, time series databases, which are all about timestamp data, are growing 87% faster than the market. One of my favorites, Graph, is growing at 40% faster than the market. Graph is a wonderful technology for relationships. And as you think about post-COVID, when we look at contact tracing and applications like that, Graph will be the foundation for a lot of those things. So, as this chart illustrates, we live in a world where not one database technology fits all needs. We're going to live in a mixed world, and really this requires thought in how we want to manage this, how we want to build out an architecture. And that's really the next part of this, which is we have to build a modern data architecture. And to me, a modern data architecture consists of 6 common characteristics. The first is it's governed, it's trusted. Trust is paramount in any type of data venture that you're going to go after, because if people don't trust data, they fundamentally won't use the data. The data has to be relevant, has to be business focused, and that may seem kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised how often we store data in a way that's conducive to processing, not how people consume it. Security is always going to be important. I mean, we have encryption and tokenization. They're critical elements of data architecture. And with all the sharing that we'll be doing of data in a digital economy, security is going to be paramount. Data has to be automated, and by automated, it's the ingestion and the processing of the data. We can't rely on long, bulky batch processes. We can't rely on what happened yesterday or last week. It has to be real time. So with data growing at these unparalleled paces, we have to make sure that we have elastic and scalable storage, and it's extensible, that the different data types that we may encounter, we can support. So this is what a modern data architecture looks a bit like. This is something we developed at L Brands. It's a picture of our high-level architecture. It was a multi-zoned data lake that really allowed for a lot of variety of different user types and different applications accessing the data. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the takeaway from this should be there's a lot of thought that has to go into building and operating a modern data architecture. So finally, our investment portfolio for data management. It's a recurring theme of data, of governance and architecture. I think it establishes a foundation. Data cleansing and quality software, something that is paramount, because master data is the biggest inhibitor to success in a lot of these digital initiatives, specifically AI and machine learning. And a lot of companies are actually applying AI and machine learning to the problem of data quality and data cleansing. A semantic layer really describes how your users see the data, and it enforces universal standards for the data metrics across the entire organization. It's a natural way for people to see the data. Multi-database models we talked about earlier. You've got to look at all these different ways of managing multiple databases, or even look at some of the new models such as Azure Cosmos or AWS Neptune, which are multi-model databases that allow you to persist data once and then see different models on top of it and how people want to access it. And finally, this whole idea of data streaming, because our data volumes are so large, being able to stream data is not just for entertainment, but also presents a lot of opportunities for improved customer and associate and partner services. So to leave this slide, it's really all about clean and trusted data that really support a wide variety of use cases. So the final piece that we'll talk about is interoperability. It's really how your systems and devices talk to one another. And this is magnified in digital because in many cases we're pulling together components to form applications. Think about Uber. It was formed with Google Maps, Google Pay, Apache Kafka for messaging. Essentially it was a bunch of components assembled into a new experience, and that's what we see more and more of in the digital age. And so when we think about that, both outside and inside the organization, we're seeing a proliferation of packages and cloud services. Interoperability becomes a key component in how we build and deploy applications. So what do we mean by interoperability? So let's look at the basic challenge of application integration. If we only had one application, life's simple. We rarely have to worry about anything. But when we add a second application, we have to integrate those two. They have to talk to one another. And while that's not that tough, when you add a third and a fourth and a fifth and so forth, we start creating a spider web, a myriad of integrations that make it very difficult to manage. Now add cloud into this, and we see that the complexity grows even further. So in fact, now, if we look at this particular picture, if I wanted to make a change to application 5, I find that I have 9 different places that I have to make changes in order to implement a new application. So is there a better way to do this? Yes. So this is the same slide laid out a little bit different ways. So 7 different applications, 3 different cloud services. And think about now, if we want to look at how we access the data. And we build a system level, and these could be services. I like to use the term API, or Application Program Interface. In this case, we group how we connect to data in the way that we consume it. Now, we go above that and we start looking at the processes. I've consumed the data, now I need to use it in certain business workflows. And finally, how does someone use that data in the construct of providing customer service? And what you see here is we've created 5 APIs, and we created 5 APIs to access all the data, 4 APIs to process it, and 2 at the top. So in total, 11 APIs replaced 90 point-to-point integrations. And so that example of changing application 5, in this case, if you look, we only have one place we have to change it. And this really builds on itself. So once I've built a set of APIs and I build them to a state that is reusable, think about now building new use cases. So let's take these e-commerce APIs that we talked about before, and let's talk about we want to build a new application, and we want to do it for store pickup. And so for store pickup, I have to have a mobile alerting system so someone knows their order's ready to pick up, and I need to be able to route the order from the distribution center to the store, or do the routing inside the store if it's in stock there. So in order to do that, I have my experience, but I have to do 2 new APIs, but I reuse all these others. So very quickly I'm getting productivity through reuse. Let's take another step and look at customer loyalty. All I really need here to do customer loyalty is to have a loyalty accumulator from all the orders that I'm placing. So suddenly I'm able to build new apps much quicker, much faster, more reliable than ever before. And that's through this whole idea of service orientation and APIs. So the investment portfolio for interoperability, the first thing is education. Make sure your organization knows about APIs, they understand what a services-oriented architecture looks like. Obviously, I keep coming back to governance, but understanding the goals and objectives is critical for API architecture because it does require fundamental changes inside the IT organization, roles, responsibilities, and even resequencing of work activities. API management, you could call this a repository or a registry, but once you build that first API, you want it to be shared. You want people to be able to find it and use it to gain the productivity you get from reuse. And then API authoring and composition. And, there's a lot of great low-code or no-code solutions to author APIs, but not only just a brand new API, but how you would combine APIs into those higher-level functions like we saw in the previous slide. And finally, you have to monitor the performance of APIs, and that's really critical for troubleshooting. Organizations face a choice. There are a lot of integrated platforms out there that do this, like MuleSoft or Boomi or Jitterbit, Web Methods, just to name a few. Then you have a lot of open source alternatives out there for all really components of API architecture. So how you choose to go about it really gets back to the IT organization and how you want to operate. But needless to say, this becomes a key component in how you can get speed and quality in your IT group. So I've covered the 3 major investments needed by IT to support digital, and we discussed them really, I would say, in terms of priority, but that doesn't require you to do one before the other. Investing isn't really a sequential process, neither is digital transformation. So to quote Stephen Covey, you began this whole process with where you're trying to go, the end in mind. And so let's take an example. If you haven't adopted Agile, then maybe you need to choose a project to start with. And if you have adopted Agile, have you taken the next step to incorporate DevOps capabilities into your project? Do you have all the tools that you need to manage Agile? And I guess when I get to it, we're all at different points in our digital journey. And the starting point for each company watching this is probably different. However, we're all trying to get to the same place. And so to build that adaptable digital platform that can match the speed of our respective businesses, we have to really consider what investments give us the most bang for our buck. And so combining elements of all these different investments is fine. In fact, the key is to choose a small effort that's small enough that you can effectively manage risk and learn. So you're going to be using new processes and tools, but it also has to be important enough that you don't want to lose interest. we have to have a vested interest in it succeeding. So choose wisely to really drive accountability and an appropriate sense of urgency, and I think you'll find that you'll be very successful with your digital transformations. Thank you.